Hello, I'm Georgia Harper. I'm policy manager at Autistica, and for the past 3 years, I've been leading the day-to-day running of the Embracing Complexity Coalition, supporting people with a range of neurodevelopmental conditions.
Okay. And hi, I'm Suzi Sapiets. I'm a researcher at the Tizard Centre at the University of Kent, and I've also spent quite a bit of time working with Georgia and the Embracing Complexity Coalition.
What is neurodivergence?
So, neurodivergence is sort of a natural diversity in the human brain, and it's lifelong for each individual, so it will affect any aspect of their life period. And it sort of influences how people think, perceive the world, and interact with others. So it can include things like autism, learning disabilities, attention differences like ADHD, Tourette's, learning difficulties, and so on. And research suggests that up to 16% of children and young people are neurodivergent, although this figure is disputed and most people think that there's actually more due to underdiagnosis and misdiagnosis. And the reason it's so important to consider in the context of youth mental health is that there is considerable overlap between neurodivergence and mental health. So there's quite a lot of people who are neurodivergent who experience mental health conditions throughout their lifetime, but especially when they're children or young people. However, our research has typically sort of excluded people who are neurodivergent, especially people who are multiply neurodivergent, so people who have maybe a diagnosis of autism and learning disability, as an example. And so while we do have research that focuses on some forms of neurodivergence in terms of mental health prevention and treatment, unfortunately it doesn't sort of embrace the complexity that most people who are neurodivergent are more likely to have more than one form of neurodivergence, which sort of limits the applicability of the research. And in terms of neurodiversity, it's really important for us to sort of embrace the fact that neurodivergence is a natural form of diversity and not a disorder that needs to be treated or changed. But historically people have been pathologized, which is probably likely to contribute to the high prevalence of mental health conditions in this group. If people have talking to them about deficits and disorders when it's just their natural way of being. And a lot of the challenges that come with neurodivergence are due to sort of the inaccessible setup of society for people who are neurodivergent.
What are the current problems with research in this area?
So I think I think there's kind of two sort of related issues. So many neurodivergent people are not diagnosed, and even if they are diagnosed, that isn't always recorded properly, or their needs just aren't recognised. People don't understand what that really means. So it means that if they're receiving mental health support, it might not be accessible for them, or they might be kind of dismissed because they're not presenting in the way that clinicians expect. And the other kind of the other potential issue is that even when you have a diagnosis, sometimes that can be the barrier because of a phenomenon we call diagnostic overshadowing. If you have a diagnosis already, even though it's not a mental health condition, it's a neurodevelopmental or neurodivergent condition, basically any and all difficulties you're having gets attributed to that. So, something that we hear quite a lot at Autistica is mental health services turning people away because, anxiety is just part of autism, which, it shouldn't be. And yeah, there are lots of barriers that this group face in terms of getting the support they need around mental health, even though mental health conditions are often, sadly, the norm rather than the exception in this group.
What is being done to help fix these problems?
What we do really need to do is have a lot more research that takes a more sort of transdiagnostic approach, and that it is accessible for different neurodivergent people, because a lot of research has either directly or indirectly excluded people who are neurodivergent, either by outright saying that neurodivergent people, will be excluded from the study, or by just not being set up in a way that sort of accommodates people who might communicate differently, for example.
That while the people our members support have a range of different diagnoses, a lot of the barriers they face are fairly similar, and a lot of the things you can do to support one group, while obviously everyone is different and there are individual differences, a lot of what the supports you can put in place for one group might really benefit others.
What's happening at the big Emerging Minds Summit?
So in our workshop, we're going to have a panel which is going to have researchers and people who have experience of neurodivergence and mental health. And so with our attendees, we're going to consider how to embrace complexity across neurodivergence and mental health. So we might think about how can we improve how we identify and support the needs of neurodivergent children and young people. We might also discuss some of the barriers that are existing, so barriers that we know that prevent people either having their needs recognised or identified, or prevent them from getting appropriate support. And so, yeah, we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion, so you'll get to hear from people with lived experience about their personal experiences, also some experiences from people who are involved in research and providing services. And then we'll sort of open it up to everybody who's able to attend, either in person or online, to sort of think through, the next steps and what we need to do to sort of improve this situation and, stop this high prevalence of mental health conditions in neurodivergent children and young people.
Who do you want to come to your workshop?
One of the things that we really want to hit home is that, as Suzi was saying, neurodivergent people make up a huge proportion of society. So if that's you or if that's your family, then you're not alone, and it can be really helpful, I think, to hear the experiences of others and, build confidence in yourself and advocating for yourself as a result. And if you are professionals, researchers, it's really, really important to know more about how to support this group, because the chances are, whether you know it or not, these are already people that you are supporting and interacting with. There's still a lot that we don't know, and I'm not going to pretend that we have all the answers, but it's about starting that conversation and finding some, some common solutions. And I think it's important that we don't shy away from I don't know how to do that, that's too hard, so I'm not going to try. I think this is where we need, where we need research to step up, as I think it is starting to.